when you go beyond those 200 years? What do we uncover about Irish food that maybe would be kind of really unknown? Because as you said, when you think of Irish food, I mean, for me, obviously the dairy, the lamb, and there are certain kind of fresh produce that really stand out, and even seafood that stand out in mind. But were there any kind of really big differences that you noticed?
No, but I suppose for me it was like the diversity of food on the island and the different like experiences that immigration to the island, I suppose that characterized it. And when you have, I mean, I suppose one of the interesting things is that when people first came to the island, there was no, I suppose there were no cows, pigs, or sheep. And I suppose three things that we define like Ireland and farming and those three things, it's like we're not even there. So for the first, like probably for the first 3,000 years, and if people have been on the island about 10, so it's a third of the time on the island, we had wild game, there wasn't even any deer. So just wild game like mallard, teal, widgeons, a lot of shellfish, a small amount of river fish like eel and salmon and sea bass, and then different wild plants and that. And so what really attracted me to that position was it reminded me of what we're trying to do now in a contemporary Irish position, is we're really trying to look at what comes from the land and that. And of course, it's not like we want to go back to that position or we're yearning for it, but it just kind of, it was an interesting kind of counterpoint to what we do in Aniar and the products that we try and investigate. So for me, looking at oysters and seaweed and wild game, like there was a certain kind of resonance of that in relation to Irishness, as opposed to beef or cattle or that came much later, even barley and that. So a lot of the things that we define as Irish are really only in the last couple of 100 years. But not only that, like that was one interesting thing. The other interesting thing was that just with those different ways of migration, for me, like with the Anglo-Normans, and Ireland has, like from the 10th century on, has been pretty much a colony of different different countries or different factions, and so that they brought with them their food and their eating experience, and so for me that was also interesting. And the kind of spice tradition in Ireland, which is probably something I don't pay much attention to in relation to contemporary food, because we don't use any spice at all in Aniar, but it's there is a rich spice tradition in Ireland for nearly 1,000 years. And
what do you mean by spice tradition? Because I'm thinking of a lot of spice. I always I guess a lot of people think of spice and they think of Far Eastern spices, right? So
yeah, but the same, yeah, black pepper, cinnamon, nutmeg, mace, like apps, like where the Normans were absolutely infatuated with it, and that's still, even if you look at the pastry tradition in Ireland, and you can see it in Denmark as well. Like our pastries are still, we have so much spice in them. And I suppose I just never really thought about it. Like even the simple carrot cake that we make has a lot of different spices in it. But it's interesting to think that these spices came from the Far East and they had to come through via England, and they came to Ireland, and they have been part of the food culture of Ireland. I mean, whether or not you want to say they are part of Irish food or not, that's one of the reasons why I wanted to try and say that I was more trying to think about food on the island of Ireland as opposed to defining Irish food, because it's quite simple to define food on the island. You just see what's been eaten here. Whereas defining Irish food is much more difficult, and it depends on so many, I suppose, other factors.